Welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am your host, John Khosravi. To learn more about the show, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Please note, this program is informational only and should not be considered legal advice. No attorney-client relationship is created. Please consult an attorney for information specific to your case. Also, this recording is copyrighted. Written permission is required for rebroadcasting. Hello, and welcome to the Immigration Lawyers Podcast. I am your host, John Khosravi, and I practice family and business-based immigration law in Los Angeles, California. To learn more about me, please visit www.jqqlaw.com. Today's guest is Sonia Figueroa. Mrs. Figueroa is a veteran of the Armed Forces, a former USCIS Adjudications officer in Los Angeles, California, and a fellow immigration attorney with a focus on family applications, removal defense, TNU visas, and VAWA petitions. Sonia's website is www.bestimmigrationattorney.com. Hi Sonia, it's good to see you today.
Hello, good morning.
Thank you for coming to talk with us. I'm using today to get to know more about you and your background and your experience. Why don't you start by telling us a little more about yourself, your personal history, where you're born, raised, your education, and other experience.
Sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. I was born in New York City in 1980s, where all Koreans from the 80s were born, which is Flushing. And I grew up in the New York, New Jersey, Long Island area for about 9 years. When I was 9 years old, my parents decided that they wanted to move back to Korea. My mother by then was a U.S. citizen. She came as an immigrant, and my father was a green card holder. And so we moved back when I was 9, and we lived in Korea for 9 years. So almost 10 years. I graduated an American high school there, a foreign high school. I returned to the United States to go to college. I was out of state no matter where I went, even though I was a U.S. citizen. So what that meant was I was not an international student, but I couldn't get any state tuition. I was limited in the grants I could get, and this was in 98 when the Korean economy had crashed and burned. So we had no money. And I ended up at a small Christian school in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. Shout out to Freed-Hardeman University. It's a great school, but it was very small and very limited in the kind of education that I could get there.
What was your major there?
World Cultures,
Interesting.
which I supplemented by doing the honors program, which was a great program. It gave me full license to study what I wanted.
Was it a big change going from Korea to Tennessee, or how was that?
Oh gosh, yes. It was severe change. To go from, I think at that time was like 8 million people in one city, all Asian, to the point that it startled me when I saw non-Asians. To go from that to 4,000 people, and only 4,000 because the school was in session. When school wasn't in session, Henderson had 2,000 people. So to go from 8 million to 2,000 people who were generally 90% white was very different. And it was interesting. It was a
How
very
was your English skills? You said you went to international school.
Correct.
So I'm guessing you didn't have an accent or you speak English
No,
fluently.
my friends at that time joked about how I actually spoke better English than they did because I could speak English, Korean, and a little bit of Spanish. And they were like, yeah, we speak English and Southern. So my English was actually pretty good, and that's what impressed the honors program people. They were like, you write well. So I even wrote back then pretty well. I loved term papers because I could just spout off my own opinion about something and find the backup for it and do the research. And so it was really great. And I think that kind of background actually prepared me for law school in a roundabout way.
What made you choose to come to Loyola after that?
Well,
Loyola Law School in Los Angeles.
Right. So I did go to Loyola. I didn't want to be an attorney. I knew I didn't want to be an attorney, and so my parents, however, were disappointed with my major. They thought I would be either doctor or lawyer. And when my honors mentor decided that I would become a great lawyer, he expressed that opinion to my parents, who took it and ran with it and said, you would be great at this. I decided, well, I have nothing better going on, so I would go to law school. I studied for the LSAT, and much to my chagrin, I did pretty well. So I joined the Army. I decided I was not prepared for law school. My parents...
How old were you at the time?
I was 22.
Okay, yeah.
21, 22. I was very young.
I found I went to law school at 21, 22 too, and I think if I waited a year or two more, I would have appreciated the experience more, understood what was happening rather than straight out of college. It was good because I started sooner on the back end, but I would have been more developed just mentally wise to deal with it. Or just
like work outside for a little while, gain some experience, and then go in. And that was the thing that I think the Army did for me. It forced me out of my comfort zone in more ways than one. But by going to the Army first, I gained some real-world experience. I mean, I went from Korea, where I was super sheltered, to a Christian school out in the middle of nowhere where I was super sheltered. And then I get out to LA. I have no idea what's going on with the world. I had no interest at that time.
Was the LA coming to LA because of the Army?
No, I came to LA. There's always a boy involved, right? No, my grandmother at the time, she was living in Garden Grove. She passed away in 2009, but at that time she was living in Garden Grove. My mother decided she wanted to move to the United States because my younger brother had gone through Korean school. Even though he was a U.S. citizen, he had been born here. We were 9 years apart. So when I was 9, I went to Korea. My mother followed to join us after she gave birth to my brother. And so he had gone to Korean school up to that point. But she wanted him to have an American education because he was a U.S. citizen. So she brought him back. And so he entered junior high here.
Oh, boy.
Yes. It was a huge, huge culture shock for him. I actually feel really bad for him, for that happening to him. And he was in either 6th grade or so, and he was going into 7th grade. And so he comes here. So we all moved into Long Beach, actually. And we spent a couple years there. And from there, I decided to see what I could do with myself. And the conclusion I came to was I spoke to a recruiter who said that, this was before we declared war on Iraq. So he said, and this was in 2001, he said, we need Korean speakers because we're going to invade North Korea. So we need Korean speakers. And I was like, okay, that's great. That is something I can do. And he said, basic training will be fine. You already have your language development, so you're just going to move up really quick. Plus, you have a college degree already, so you'll start out as a specialist instead of a private. And because 9/11 had just happened, I signed up in May of 2002. I was in talks in March of 2002 because September 11th, 2001, when 9/11 happened, I was in college. I graduated in December, and then I signed up in March. Well, I started talking to people in March. Signed up in May, and I was angry. I was really angry, and I wanted to do something. And since I didn't have any real marketable skills at that point, I thought, well, I'm young, I'm healthy, and the reason I joined the military, well, there are many reasons, but one of them was my background is Korean. Korea is still technically at war with North Korea. There's simply an armistice, right? I firmly believe I would not exist today if Korea had not, if America had not intervened in Korea. And I will always be, for all the failings that this nation has every now and again, they've done a lot of good too. And I think South Korea sometimes forgets, if America did not intervene, we would all be communist. I wouldn't be alive, actually, because the town that my grandparents come from, was overrun, and people were massacred in those towns. So had they not escaped, they would be dead. I believe that firmly. And my parents would have never met, and then because they met in New York City, and so because of the United States, I exist today. So when I heard some soldiers in advanced training, which is after basic, bashing immigrants, I got really, really upset. And in class, I stood up and I said, look, my mother overstayed her B-2 visa. She married my father, who had a green card. He entered as an immigrant. I have no idea how or what the circumstances were, but he entered as an immigrant. And they got married, and then she eventually got her U.S. citizenship. She had 3 children, one of whom is sitting next to you. So do not tell me that quote, illegal immigrants are useless, worthless money grubbers, because that is not necessarily the case. I shut the whole room up and I made a point to tell them, look, I want to say thank you to the country that I was born in. I wanted to say thank you to the country that allowed me to be born in this country and that afforded me so many opportunities that I, as a woman in Korea, would have never experienced. I don't come from the ruling class, you know. I don't come from money. You have to come from those things in order to advance in Korea. Nepotism is a given. Mm-hmm. I would not have had the opportunities that I've had here. So anyway, so that was one of the many reasons. So when 9/11 happened, I was like, I need to do something. Join the military. Got to the military and learned that everything wasn't like in the movies. I had watched G.I. Jane right beforehand. I had watched a lot of A Few Good Men. I had watched movies like that, and I was very starry-eyed about the experience. But it turned out to be just like any other job. Mm-hmm. You know, you train, you work out, you go to work. It's pretty much the same deal. Plus, I was in the National Guard, so we only trained 1 weekend a month. But when I got back from training in, I think it was August or September, my first drill after that was in September. By November, we were called to duty. We were going to go to Iraq. Because March 17th, 2002, my graduation gift was Bush declaring war. It happened the same day. I was like, awesome, I know where I'm going after this. And I thought for a minute that I wasn't even going to get to go to training because I thought that we were all just going to get shipped out. They kind of made it like that could be possible, but no, I went on to training. I trained as a counterintelligence officer, military intelligence. I did not actually see combat. Fortunately, unfortunately, my ankle was severely injured in basic, and I never quite healed from it to the point that walking hurt. And I had to have surgery. So they decided that I was not fit for duty, which I completely agreed with. And so I was left behind while my unit was called up. I met my husband in my unit, and he went to Iraq for a year. Mm-hmm. And every time he would call me, he would say, I am so glad you're not here. Yeah. Because of the things that he saw, which he actually doesn't really talk about. So that was quite the experience for us. When I left the military, I decided that I would reapply to law school. I wrote to Loyola, and I said, look, I'm back from training. May I please have my spot back? And they said yes. Pepperdine said, we didn't keep your spot. Loyola said, yes, we will actually give you a spot, which was a year after I was supposed to start. Mm-hmm. So in 2004, I entered law school, Loyola Law School. Ironically, Southwestern turned me down, which I thought was a surprise. I had hoped for Southwestern because I could walk there from where I lived. But Loyola was just as close, and it turned out to be a really good choice.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
And so you graduated, you say you started in 2004, you graduated in 2007?
Correct.
And then you're thrown out into the wild of it.
Well, I went through law school not wanting to be a lawyer.
Experience did you gain that, looking back from that point now?
Looking back on it now, I wish I had applied myself more. Yeah. And I wish I had taken more, because I focused in on elder law, family law, marital property, animal law, children in the law. I mean, I took literature in the law. I took classes that had no practical value necessarily, but were very interesting to me. Yeah. In some ways, it did prepare me for what I decided would become my life goal. In other ways, though, it didn't prepare me to actually physically do anything. Mm-hmm. I didn't take immigration law. I didn't take business law. I mean, I took the required course, but
Did you have any thinking or was there anything you're thinking that you would eventually do immigration? Was that
No, not at all. I thought I was going to be a law librarian, actually. So I needed my JD and my master's in library science in order to be a law librarian. So I figured I was just checking a box, honestly, because I didn't want to practice. Even then, going through law school, I knew I did not want to practice, which is why it took me 3 years to take the bar. I waited 3 years.
So you graduated 2007. You said you didn't take the bar, so
until 2010.
What did you do after you got out of school?
I worked for other attorneys, and then I decided if they could practice law, then I could too.
I've seen that a lot. I've seen like when these guys are lawyers, especially for the bar exam. I'm like, well, if these guys pass it, it's got to be possible.
It has to be possible. Exactly. I genuinely realized if these guys can do it, I can do it. And so I decided if they can practice law, then so can I. And it actually motivated me to go into law because I also decided that I wanted to be a different kind of lawyer.
What areas of law were you working in at the time with those lawyers?
Bankruptcy, personal injury, lemon law, criminal law, and estate planning.
So you had the full mix.
I did. I tried to get a job pretty much anywhere that they needed a Korean speaker. So that opened some doors for me. My first office was estate planning, in fact, in 2010. After I passed the bar, I decided I was going to go out on my own because I thought I knew everything. And I became an estate planning attorney during the worst recession that I've seen in my lifetime. Not the best idea. Kind of hard to convince somebody that they want to pay thousands of dollars to create a trust when they're about to lose their house. So it was not the brightest move. But I did learn a lot then. I made a lot of mistakes then that I haven't repeated when I opened up my immigration practice.
What kind of stuff? Too much on overhead?
Yes. Too much overhead.
I see that a lot of people do.
I do not need an office downtown. As you know, I'm not actually downtown, which was the best decision. I spent so much money on just overhead money that I did not have. This time around, I took out a business loan. I actually recommend that for two reasons. One, it gives you working capital. Two, it motivates you to gain clients. I had no motivation because I went into my savings to do it initially. So I thought I could just write out checks. Big mistake. And we kicked a very big hole in our savings. So that was a mistake. I also had no business plan. I had no idea how I was going to accomplish what I was trying to do. I did not advertise. I did not market. I did not network. I did nothing.
Let's back up. Like, do you have a physical business plan that you wrote? Or is it a mindset?
I don't. It's just kind of a sense that I have. I mean, I do have people that I know that do business plans. In fact, my office roommate, he does business plans, and I ask him, bounce ideas off of him every once in a while. And he does immigrant business plans too, actually. But other than that, what I did do was, when I got a physical business plan the first time, I didn't do it myself. I farmed it out, which was a mistake, I think, because I didn't put myself through the process of thinking about how I was going to do this. I just figured I needed a business plan. I didn't know why. So I had somebody make one and spent money doing that for no apparent reason because I had no idea what to do with it even.
Interesting.
This time around, I started writing one, but then it actually, just the exercise of trying to write one, which, by the way, I failed miserably at, but just the exercise of it helped me to articulate my audience, the people I wanted to market to, the people I wanted to work with, and it actually helped me hone in and focus on areas that I wanted to work with.
I've done the same for my business plan. I wrote a draft, and I haven't finished it. It's on my to-do list for like a year now.
Right.
But it got me to visualize like who the marketing niches that you're going towards or group, and how I'm going to run my office, how like this works, that works. And it's all in my head, and it's probably better I do finish it, but the groundwork is there to get me thinking about what the important parts of the full picture of the practice
are.
Like
what you want to focus on. And it even helped me to focus on who I was going to market to, because I decided to use, we deal with immigrants, right? So marketing to English-speaking people doesn't necessarily gain you any kind of traction. Whereas marketing to the Koreans specifically, or the Hispanics specifically in Spanish, in Korean, has definitely helped a lot more. So, but that happened after USCIS.
With regards to your practice, we're kind of jumping ahead, but you do family applications, removal defense, TU visas, and VAWA. Do you touch upon other areas of immigration, or have you narrowed your focus down to these just to master these?
I've narrowed down and focused on these. Within those, there's a lot of things that could happen. But
each of those could be their own thing.
Correct, correct. I initially tried to do just family petitions, But most people don't necessarily need a lawyer for that, and I want to help people. I will help people by holding their hand if that's what they want, but I do find it far more interesting when I'm helping people who are in dire situations, like removal defense or a VAWA case. VAWA being Violence Against Women's Act, it's a form of petitioning. You can petition for yourself even though you're married to a U.S. citizen or permanent resident if that person has been very violent or abusive towards you. And
but how do you deal with the pressures of a T visa, U visa, VAWA? Do you kind of get used to the stories?
I go to therapy. Honestly, I have to vent. So I pay somebody that I can vent to because we do have confidentiality issues. So I will tell stories when I can. And I meditate. I look for ways to do self-care. I think that's extremely important. As an attorney, as well as the thing that I deal with, there is something called professional burnout when you're dealing with victims almost on a daily basis. So I have to guard against that a lot.
Do you have to get yourself detached from the person?
Yeah. You do, and detached from their story to some extent, and remind yourself there is something called vicarious trauma, where you experience the trauma yourself by the person telling you the story. I have cried because of clients. I have cried in front of clients from their stories. But then you have to take a moment to step back and say, but that's not my story.
How do you keep a client, say like this, but in line when they're going on tangents or getting very emotional? Have you gotten better at controlling it so they don't get lost in the misery?
In the misery and the details, the weeds. I do. I tell them to take a deep breath and reset. Or sometimes I'll just stop the interview and the declaration taking or whatever it is that I'm doing. I'll say, you know what? We've done enough today. I have actually stopped clients and said, they're like, no, I have more time. And I'm like, that's fine. I can't do it. I admit that I have a limit.
Do you already have in your mind like a ceiling of how much like an hour of that is enough? Because I've had practitioners say we only limit it to like 1.5, 2 hours max because the person gets worn down and it's just not conducive for the whole process for them to really go into that thought process of what happened.
3 hours is
3 hours max.
3 hours is my max because I hit that ceiling at 3 hours. I obviously watch them to make sure that they're not suffering because that's counterproductive. And I take the declarations myself. I don't have staff, so I do it myself because I also am able to craft the direction of the story and make sure I get the information that's needed. I made the mistake of asking one client to write her own story, and she came back with 40 pages.
Oh, man.
In Korean, which had to be translated. And even the translator, the person that I hired to do the translation, asked me, are you sure you want this? Because she goes everywhere, and she gets into too many details that don't seem. So then I flipped it around, and I decided, no, I will take declarations from now on with an interpreter.
One thing, it's kind of a side thing, but I realized what law school did for me is it taught me how to think in a formal fashion. So and that's what lawyers are when we write these affidavits and letters or drafts for people to sign. It controls the story in a very formulaic, logical fashion. Where when I deal with non-lawyers, it's just when you ask them something, they just go all over the place and say everything. And I think that's what law school does. It teaches you how to think in a proper fashion.
In a linear way.
Linear way, yeah.
And I think officers, and having been an officer, I would have to say appreciate that to some extent. On the one hand, they're thinking, oh, the attorney wrote it. Right? So you try to keep it in the voice of the victim as much as possible. The survivor, not the victim, the survivor, as much as possible. However, as an officer reading these affidavits, I would much rather read a coherent telling of events than how the cat died and then the dog died and then your sister died, and then it's like none of that has to do with your escape from the situation. I mean, it's horrific and it's horrible that that's happened to you, but it has nothing to do with your situation.
The law and what details you have to, what boxes you have to check. And
correct. In order to decide, okay, do you qualify for this? Well, do you meet this requirement, this requirement, this requirement? If I have to read through.
Okay, so let's go back to your experience as a USCIS adjudications officer. This happened after you had your practice, and you stopped the practice and you went to USCIS. How did that opening transition happen?
So when I closed my practice and I realized that I had no idea what I was doing, I was willing to admit it. It was an epic fail, which was fine. And I started doing document review. And I actually spent 2 years doing various document review for patent litigation firms. Okay. Because I spoke Korean, I could read and write Korean. I got hired on as a junior associate at a particular firm, actually. I got the opportunity to go to D.C. and practice in front of the International Trade Commission. And that was very fascinating. I worked in a high-pressure environment, but I was extremely unhappy. I do not like litigation on that level. When one conglomerate is suing another conglomerate, quite frankly, I don't care. I was making good money. I'll give it that. But money isn't everything. And I felt like I was spinning my wheels. So I started applying to jobs that I thought were interesting and preferably didn't require practicing law, but required a JD. I applied for immigration service officer position in, I do believe it was July or October. Months.
Where did you learn about the position?
USAjobs.com? No, .gov. Sorry.
Sure.
And because I'm a veteran, we have veteran preference. So I got an interview with them. They hired me subject to a background check, and meaning that during my probationary period, if something popped up, they could still let me go. So I went ahead and started March 11th, 2013.
Did they need a JD for this position?
Well, the thing is, starting, I don't know, recently, I guess, to be a GS9, which is what I was, you needed to have either a master's or a JD. To be a GS11, you have to have a PhD or an LLM. I wasn't quite certain if that was a new thing, which I think it is, to require such an advanced level of education. But I think it's a good thing. I think it's a good thing because then it raises the comprehension bar on like how much you need to understand. And so yes, my JD definitely helped me get in the door. Plus, I love people. I love talking to people. I thought that this was a great opportunity. When I went for my interview, I stressed the fact that, yes, I had zero immigration experience other than what my family's been through personally. But other than that, I had interviewing experience based on my training in the military. And I just like talking to people. So they thought that that was a good enough background. And what I didn't know, I was going to learn anyway. So I was hired. And they sent me to training where I learned way too much all at once. And applying it became a little bit difficult. But eventually you get into the swing of things. I worked on family petitions, doing interviews for green cards. I also worked on 601s, waivers, and I worked on I-290B motions to reopen. Those were basically my focus and my babies because I loved complex cases. What I learned early on was that it's not hard, it's just complicated. If you can break the case down to its basics, then there is no decision that you can't come to, right or wrong. I found cases that had been sitting there for 3, 4, 5 years because apparently nobody could come to a decision or chose not to. I don't know what the deal is. So then I would work on those cases because I loved it. I loved the idea of going back and clearing. I'm very task oriented. So if you gave me a shelf of cases, I loved seeing that shelf in a week and it being empty. Even if you're going to refill it the next day, I loved seeing that. And I enjoyed that so much. And the fact that I was able to make decisions that allowed people to move on with their lives. For better or for worse, I approved some cases, I denied some cases. Even denials where it broke my heart because I was like, there's no way that these people should get deported. But they had no basis to stay. So then my supervisor...
What was the quality of the I-290Bs? Were a lot of them just Hail Mary passes people would throw?
Yes, especially the ones that were improper. Those got regularly denied outright because making an appeasement to the officer's emotions doesn't show the officer why it should be reopened.
Yeah.
You can reopen on facts and you can reopen on the law. If you don't have facts, you have only a motion, and you don't have the law, then there is no basis, no matter how sympathetic the officer can be to you. And generally, officers are really not that sympathetic because they denied you to begin with for a reason.
Yeah.
So you have to overcome that reason, and it's nothing personal. But the best motions to reopen that I saw were well developed and were well argued. So if you are comfortable with arguing against an officer, oh, and by the way, the same officer does not decide the motion to reopen.
Okay, that's good.
At least I made sure of that. So if somebody tried to motion to reopen my own case that I had denied during an interview, then I would hand that off to a different officer because I just thought that that was strange. Officers are usually assigned motions to reopen. So you have an officer who does motions to reopen for a couple weeks, and then they might assign to somebody else. But then if that person sees their own case, they shouldn't be adjudicating it. It shouldn't happen. I don't think it does.
And how do they choose between the officer doing it or going to AAO or?
Oh, okay. So it's what you request. So, okay, an I-130 generally goes to the BIA. So you can't really do a motion to reopen an I-130. Usually what you do is a BIA appeal. But if the BIA appeals go through the original office because they want to take a look at it and see if they can just turn it into an MTR. If they can turn it into a motion to reopen, then they will, and then the appeal is moot. However, if they don't want to reopen it, or they have no idea what's going on, which sometimes is the case, then they'll just forward it to the BIA. So that's the Board of Immigration Appeals. If the motion to reopen is for a 601 waiver, then it will go to the AAO. If the motion to reopen is the motion to reopen a motion to reopen, which sometimes we do get, or it's an appeal, then it goes to the AAO. However, it starts out as a motion to reopen.
Okay.
But you have to check off that you want to go to the AAO. But again, we'll take a look at the AAO, and if the AAO looked like something that we could do in-house, then we would just convert it to an MTR.
I see.
There's also something called a service motion to reopen, which is a handy tool to have in your back pocket. If the service makes an error that you can point out simply, like let's say they said, oh, you never submitted the RFE, but you have proof that you did submit it, it's just it never got to the officer or the file. In that situation, you can file a service motion to reopen without fee to the office, and it should still be within the 30 days. Doesn't necessarily have to be if it's service error, but within reasonable time. Then generally you can get things reopened without having to pay anything. And a service motion to reopen, you don't have to fill out any form. It's a letter, you argue your case, and then you present it to the supervisor.
I see. So how did you learn? You said, we've talked about this before, you went through a really highly pressure learning experience, education experience through USCIS to teach you about all the various stuff, which people listening to this, our lawyers know, the complexity of immigration law, the nuances and the constant changes where if it's 245I in a certain year, it's okay. Now, these are like nuances that take time to learn. And myself, like, it was a learning experience to really get all these things down. Every day I'm still learning. You had to do that in your own study time after you started adjudicating as well?
Well, no, I mean, yes, to some degree they do throw you in, but your supervisor's already trained and has been doing it for a while. So anytime you have a question, you can take it to your supervisor. There's also somebody called a senior ISO officer who will answer the tough questions, especially when the law is unsettled in a certain area. So you have them as your resource for sure. They also do regular trainings. So I actually received a 1-week training on how to adjudicate an I-485 a couple months before I went to training. So that I could start doing interviews as soon as possible. They had me shadow and observe for a week. So I would go into different officers to see what kind of interviews they did, how they did it, and to get pointers and what to look for.
How often would you have like a peculiar issue on a marriage adjustment case? A majority of them just standard?
Once a day.
Once a day?
At least. There would always be something.
Yeah.
And this is for all the attorneys out there who do practice immigration. I have to say, don't become the guy that is known around the immigration office as proffering marriage fraud cases.
Mm-hmm.
They know.
Mm-hmm.
They know if you tend to be shady often, they pick up on that. We knew. We knew that if you were, and I won't name names, but we knew that if you were a certain kind of attorney, that we needed to look at your case a second time, because chances are there was something in there questionable, which is unfortunate, because there are people, genuinely good people who come to you with genuine, and yet they get the extra scrutiny because we know that this person is not a good person.
Mm-hmm.
That screws the client,
mm-hmm.
because the client cannot, in their defense, say, oh, my attorney didn't tell me. Yeah. That's not a defense. So when something wrong happens, if the officer wants to make a big deal of it, which they're entitled to, then the client is the one that gets screwed, not the attorney. The attorney gets paid either way.
Yeah.
And there were times when I wanted to tell the client that was sitting in front of me, whose card I had to deny for whatever reason, had your attorney fixed this or done this, something very simple, I could be handing you the approval letter today.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't, because your attorney didn't follow through on something.
Oh.
But then again, on the flip side, I know some really, really good attorneys that I knew when their cases came in, I actually would physically relax.
Mm-hmm.
Because I knew that they generally, usually, it's not that I didn't do my job for sure, but I knew in general that they brought good cases. Mm-hmm. So if they were representing somebody, then I didn't necessarily have to worry as much. There might be a technicality and difficulty, and I actually had to have an entire discussion, and we resolved it collaboratively. I was the officer, he was the attorney, and his case resulted in a denial because I didn't understand necessarily an aspect of CISPA, mm-hmm. Child Status Protection Act, that which is very complicated in and of itself. Yeah. And he showed me why I was wrong in my denial. Mm-hmm. I reopened it and proved it, as soon as I could come to that conclusion. And that was great, because I realized he actually reasons through. He deals with his clients directly. He reasons through the cases directly. Yeah. And that had me gain a lot of respect for him. So, and people like him would bring interpreters that could interpret, mm-hmm. not the family member who can speak Spanish and English, because then that holds up the process of the interview. Whereas if you have a good interpreter.
Is there a worry that the interpreter just makes up stuff?
Yes.
How do you overcome that?
Absolutely a worry. You have to trust to some extent. You really do. Mm-hmm. And the way that, as an officer, I would try to overcome that is I would repeat the question if I felt like the answer wasn't what it should be, in terms of if they're talking for 2 minutes and the guy gives me no, then I know there's a problem. So then I would repeat the question in a different way so that I get a different response. So then they would have to repeat themselves, but in a different way. So that's how I would generally do it. An interpreter who tries to help too much is noticeable. Mm-hmm. And again, they get known. Good interpreters get known around the office. Bad interpreters get known around the office. Especially if they're also the ones preparing the documents. That's a fraud signifier, by the way. Mm-hmm. If the person who signed the marriage certificate, notarized everything, prepared the documents, and did everything all at once, is weird. It looks weird.
I think is it technically okay to for you an attorney to translate, but it's frowned upon?
Well, to translate documents, yes, it's okay. It's frowned upon because then you can be deposed as the translator.
Oh yeah, and then
attorney-client privilege, and then it becomes a total cluster. So that's why generally I personally would recommend that you get somebody else to sign off on the translation mm-hmm. who does read both, the languages, even if you're the one who initially does it, in order to keep costs down. Yeah. If that keeps costs down, I don't know if that would for some people. But in an interview, if you come in as the interpreter, you cannot be the lawyer. So you can't object to anything, mm-hmm. or not object, because it's not an adversarial process, people. So stop arguing with the officer. But
really, the attorney just supposed to stay quiet in the back and
correct.
be a
witness.
The
less you say, the better the interview is going. Mm-hmm. I always tell applicants who literally are sitting there going, "Why did I pay you to be here?" Yeah. That's why you pay them to be there. The less your attorney says during an interview, the better everything is okay. If your attorney has to keep interjecting and keeping the officer in check, then there's a problem. Mm-hmm. Not with your case necessarily, but with the officer. And I also tell people they want an attorney during the interview not because some people are like, well, don't you look guilty? And I'm like, absolutely not. Actually, having an attorney there is helpful because it keeps the officer in check. Some officers might, I won't say that they do, but they might take greater liberties as to what is being asked because there's no attorney. And so because the applicant doesn't necessarily know their rights as to when they push it too far. I'm not saying that they straight up break the law. I'm just saying, like, if they take the questions too far, the applicant doesn't know to say, I don't have to answer that, or I don't think that that's an appropriate line of questioning. But the attorney can. And the officer can be mad at the attorney and not the applicant, which is the attorney's job.
Now, after an interview is done, what do you recommend? Should you always ask for a decision or opinion as to the interview?
You should always ask for some kind of letter evidencing that the interview happened.
Okay.
There have been cases where I granted motions to reopen because the notes weren't good enough, and I wasn't even sure if the interview had happened.
Wow.
But if you have a letter that says your interview was continued or something, then you have proof. You always want proof. Otherwise, it's your word against theirs. So you want a letter, either a letter of continuance, which they're required to give you anyway, or if they happen to make a decision, they'll give you a decision letter right then and there too.
Oh, that's cool. Okay.
And you might be able to ask the officer, what kind of time frame are they looking at? What are they waiting for? Is there some way that you can, get a decision soon? However, if you don't hear anything within 2 months, that's when you should start poking around and finding out why. If they say it's still under security review or there's some kind of question, then one of two things is happening. Either your client is being held up for possible security connections, like terrorism, or like their name popped up in places that it shouldn't have, or the second time that something like that would come up is if there's a fraud situation. Yeah. They won't tell you that. You'll just be in pending hell.
Yeah, I have that issue with consular processing at the embassy, especially with Iranian cases. I mean, I've seen it take a year and a half, even in the worst cases. And
right, because everybody's names are so similar.
Yeah,
so
everyone names are Kid Muhammad.
Exactly, or like everybody's name is Maria and Jose. So they have to go through each and every name and rule you out.
Yeah.
So for every Jose that was born on this particular date from this particular country, they have to rule everybody out. So that takes time.
Oh, that's just a hot mess. I'm glad I don't.
Right.
So you ended up leaving USCIS and just right afterwards starting your own practice?
I did. To be fair, I spent a couple months trying to look for a job. But immigration tends to be a solo practice kind of area. So it was difficult. And I had no interest or background in business immigration, which narrowed down even further what I could get. I finally decided that while I was doing my job search, which I actually went on for about a year, while I was doing my job search, I decided to open my practice and try to develop it, see where it went. So on the one hand, I was looking for a job. On the other hand, I was also looking for clients. So I did everything I could for my business, but I was also every day looking at jobs.
You had talked about getting the word out, so you're in the Korean media and stuff, and ads and stuff. How much has the advertisement provided turnover? Has it paid for itself, or is it kind of hit and miss?
Well, I made sure that the advertisement would pay for itself with max 2 clients. I do newspaper. That helped. I got a lot of calls from that initially, but most of those people were just shopping around.
Yeah.
And I put in the Korean newspaper called Sports Seoul. The other methods that I have used are posting on Craigslist, not really useful. Yelp has helped. Posting
a lot of attorneys are afraid of doing Yelp. I did Yelp, and I tell people, they're like, oh, it's risky because people could leave bad reviews, and there's no getting rid of it.
Correct.
But I've seen it help a lot.
Or sometimes when they leave good reviews, if they don't really review other businesses, then they're hidden. Like, they don't even show up.
Yeah, I have that problem, too.
Which upset me because both of my, quote, hidden reviews are from actual clients, and yet nothing. But whatever. I do have some other reviews on there, so that has been helpful. Yeah, it is a double-edged sword for sure. And one client of a friend of mine actually left her an extremely bad review, which she's still dealing with, because she wouldn't refund the money after her client didn't get the outcome that she wanted, even though she did all the work. She wanted a full refund.
Wow.
After she spent like 6 months working on her case. Not okay.
Yeah.
Not okay. And so she's dealing with that. Yes, review. So AVO, also, I'm on there. It's helpful. And
when I started, AVO was the first place I went, and I actually got clients from there. It was really helpful. And you just got to do your profile. I talked to a lot of attorneys about this, and they don't make their AVO profile. They come to me, how do you get clients? I'm like, have you done your profile? They're like, no. I'm like, at least put a picture up so they see you're a real person, not that just blank image.
Exactly, so that they can find you online and Facebook, Google+. I mean, it's just, even if you don't do anything with it, even if your website is static, just having a website, it gives people some place to go. Yes, that it's not brick and mortar, but it tells them that you're an actual presence and that you can be held accountable, that they can come find you later if they decide that you've somehow screwed them, you know, then that's what they want. They don't want to fly by night, and but my best referrals come from my own clients referring me to other people, or my colleagues referring me to other people. That's the best way. And I do free consultations. I know a lot of immigration attorneys don't, or they charge and then they roll it in. I figure even if I were to charge initial consultation, if you choose not to show up, then how am I going to collect on that anyway? So I do free consultations just so that I can get you in the door. First of all, to see whether or not you even have a case. Secondly, to tell you things so that when you go to the notario or the shyster attorney, you will know that you're being lied to, even if you decide not to hire me. Although there are some situations where I saw my client taking notes, not my client, my prospective client taking notes, and then never called back. Yeah. I'm like, okay, you know what, whatever. That's my public service.
How much time do you give them in a free consultation?
Hour and a half.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I give them quite a bit of time because it takes that much time. I don't want to hurry them and then find out that they were beaten within an inch of their life, but they kind of didn't have time to mention that. So now they have a U visa case. You know, it's fully developing a client's case is my priority. And my demeanor towards them makes a lot of difference. I've had clients sign up immediately because they said, I like you. You listened to me. You went through my case for real. You actually flipped through my documents in front of me. They told me about attorneys who said, okay, put the documents there. Okay, I got your case. I'll give you a call.
Yeah, it kind of depresses me when I hear about that. Like you said, to develop a case and talk to a person, and some people give their paralegal to talk, but if you're talking for an hour and a half, at that hour and a half point, you'll get a piece of information that could be all the difference, that they didn't realize the point, or they're too embarrassed to say it, or all this kind of stuff. So it's so key for the attorney to go in there and constantly ask questions and really get good at the interview skills of getting the information out, making them comfortable to say it. Because that could be make or break in a case, that piece of information.
Exactly. And some people would say, well, shouldn't you be compensated for your time? And I say, I do get compensated eventually. Because if I just get one client, then that client just paid for all the free consultations that I've done. And the thing is, these clients know other people. So even if you can't help them directly because they have no money or they have no desire or there's really nothing you can do for them, they have a cousin, they have a sister, they have a housekeeper even in one person's case. You know, they have people that they know that might be able to use your services that they can pass along your card to. Make sure you give them cards. You know, if nothing else, even if they choose not to go with you, just give them cards and say, you know, here's a stack of cards, please. I actually had one person take a box of cards because they go to church.
Yeah. Oh, perfect.
Right. So didn't get anything from that other than lose a box of cards. But hey, it can't hurt.
You never know. Yeah.
You never know. And one time I was volunteering. Volunteering is a huge thing too. As you can tell, I'm very service-oriented, so I volunteer at a lot of things. I volunteer at the Korean American Bar Association Legal Clinic that they do once a month. It's for monolingual Korean speakers to come and ask various things. So I answer questions on immigration and on estate planning, since I do have a background in it. And I also do the NALEO Citizenship Workshop. National Association of Elected Latino Officials, I think, is what it stands for. They do citizenship workshops like once a month or once every 2 months, and I go to those. I have actually gotten clients from that because I'll give them my card because they can't proceed with their case right then and there because they need something. And so then I'll say, look, you don't have to contact me, and that's the other thing. No reason to pressure them.
Yeah.
Again, you want to be, you end up being their counselor, sometimes their therapist, sometimes their friend. And yes, you are their attorney, and everything that you do, you want to gear towards getting them a resolution. But being their counselor and their therapist and their friend allows you to make them feel comfortable with you so that they don't feel like they're getting gypped when they're spending thousands of dollars on something where the resulting product is a stack of papers.
Mm-hmm. Do you have any other case, or do you have a case that's on your mind that's taking a lot of your focus right now?
I do. Because I do deal with survivors, they do take a lot. And sometimes I have nightmares.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because the capacity for humans to hurt each other is astounding.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how, because I personally am not of that nature, how some people can do the things that they do to other human beings whom they claim they love. So I'm talking like wives, husbands. Yeah. I'm talking about children. I'm talking about teenagers, trafficking cases. I'm talking about just your fellow human being. The ability to subject them to the cruelty or abuse or exploitation that I've seen in the short time that I've been practicing, 1.5 years-ish, is mind-blowing. That takes up a lot of my time and my energy. That's why I meditate. That's why I try to remind myself and try to be good to myself when I can, because I am trying to metabolize this information. Otherwise, it's usually when it gets closer to a decision time, like an interview or something, I get nervous because so much does depend on the officer. And we don't know what kind of officer we're going to get. I just had an interview where we got the approval notice. It's in the mail. But she gave us such a hard time. Mm-hmm. I was so sure. And it was somebody that I used to work with. So I wondered, is she giving me a hard time because it's me? Or is she giving them a hard time because she's just a space cadet and she just needs to ask everything and anything under the sun and not make any sense? I wasn't sure. And it made me really uncomfortable. But we got approved. So apparently she still stayed within the confines of what she needed to do. But she gave us a hard time. And that bothers me.
Yeah, the whole RFEs and response is such a nervous thing because a
lot
lot
of times... I've heard in business they're getting blanket RFEs for things that have already been submitted.
Oh, yeah, you always get that. Or like, did you not look at it? And you got to send it again thinking like, well, is it going to work this time or not? And it's really stressful. Like, I have cases like L1Bs. Those are intercompany transfer of specialized knowledge. It's sometimes it's a crapshoot whether they're going to appreciate what the guy's doing with specialized knowledge or not, or just tons of issues if they're going to find immigrant intent if the guy came here and adjusted or changed status. I'm like, it just, without going too much detail, it's always these little worries. And luckily it's always worked out for me, but it takes that one time to really ruin yourself and hurt a client. And
we're talking about their lives.
Yeah.
And you know what's funny? When I started law school, I was like, well, one reason I don't want to practice law is because I don't want me and my personality and my face and my ethnicity or whatever to be the chokehold for whether or not the person gets to stay in this country, whether or not the person gets to live or die, whether or not the person gets to keep their house. I mean, it's like the responsibility. Actually, you know what? I can sum this up. The responsibility of what I do keeps me up at night.
Yeah.
Because I do take it so seriously, and these people are people. And when I was an officer, I loved I would go up to my supervisor, and I would tell him, you had nothing to do with it. I know you had nothing to do with my hiring because you didn't even know I was coming. Because they, dropped me on him. Literally. He was like, who are you? And I'm like, oh, I'm your new officer. And he's like, okay. But I would go up to him, and I'd be like, thank you for my job. I would do this for free, but I know that would put you in federal prison. So I'm glad I'm getting paid for this, but I would do this for free because I love what I was doing for people. Giving them closure, for better or for worse. If I denied you, you got closure. If I approved you, you got closure. You could go on with your life. You weren't in pending hell forever. And that sense of accomplishment, on the flip side of it, now that I'm the one responsible to make the officer make a decision, the responsibility is so heavy and it is so personal. because they're not going to cry in front of the officer. They're going to cry in front of me. They're going to blame me one way or the other. You know, but then again, if they get it done, if I get it done right and everything goes fine, then hopefully they're blaming somebody else if something else goes wrong. But you know, it's nerve-wracking. It is so nerve-wracking. And I know a lot of other attorneys, the way they do it is they disconnect, I guess.
Yeah.
Or disassociate from their clients to some extent. But I couldn't live with myself, honestly, in a lot of ways. And I hate doing 601As, like where I hate when somebody has to leave the country. I will look for ways.
Yeah, it's a terrible way to do it, yeah.
For them to stay and do it.
I'm glad we have the provisional waiver now, at least.
At least, right?
Yeah.
And some countries are safer than others, you know, but man, it makes me nervous. So then I will like grill them on, have you ever been hit by anybody else? Did you call the cops? I mean, I will look for any other visa if I can. I mean, some cannot be, you know, there's no way around it. I have a case right now where I think she's a good candidate for cancellation, but the judge keeps pushing for 601A. But that makes me so nervous because then she's going to go out of the country and then it's going to all depend on them. And then what if she gets caught over there?
Once it's in the consul and everything, it's even more of a crapshoot than a USCIS officer.
Exactly. And they have no review, so there's no way to argue if they say no. Then she's stuck over there, and she has 2 kids here and her husband's here.
Yeah, I hate that whole...
It's so nerve-wracking, and it's so scary, and I'm very scared for her.
And it costs a ton of money to do a 601A for these people. A lot of times, provisional waiver people aren't rich people. Like, it's the majority, almost all the time they aren't. So, like, the consular fees and legal fees and 601A fees, and it's just a multi-year process. Like,
and it breaks their backs, you know, and it's...
If it doesn't work, it's just like a wall fell. Like after all that, it still didn't work.
Or like another client that I was just appearing for, she's under order supervision, right? I was reading her sheet that they give you when they put you under order supervision, and she's like, "What does all this mean?" And I'm like, "Think of yourself on probation.
Yeah.
Think of yourself on probation." She's like, "That means I'm a criminal." I'm like, "Basically, that's how they're treating you." You know, and that breaks my heart.
Yeah.
You know, it's an administrative process. But
we're about to end it, but you talked about meditation. I was going to say, do you do any particular type of meditation or anything that you leave us with?
Guided visuals. So when I start ruminating about things that I have no control over, because that's usually what causes stress, right?
Yeah.
When I start ruminating, what I do is and this was given to me, I envision I'm sitting on the banks of a river. A slow brook, maybe. Deep enough that there's water flow, but, you know, not so deep that, you know, it's rushing and raging. So there's a river. It's a calm river, and there's trees overshadowing. So I'm sitting in the shade of a tree on the bank of the river. You can smell it, you can hear it, you can see it. And while I'm sitting there are these leaves. So it's generally right around fall. There's these leaves, and they are going down the river. And these leaves, as they go down the river, you pick one up, and you start setting them on the river. So each leaf is a thought, a negative thought that you want to gain some distance from. Put the thought on the leaf, send it down the river. Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of visual imagery that I do. And I learned it from my therapist, actually, and the reason I go to therapy is because there is so much trauma that I deal with that I can't contain it all by myself. Mm-hmm. And I don't have the tools to deal with it. I'm allowed to have my strange thoughts and my weird way of reacting to things when I don't know how to react. But I can only do that so many times before I'm the one that needs to be in the loony bin, you know? So by having a therapist, or by having somebody you can talk to, or by having somebody that you can decompress with, and by having tools to decompress with, it makes all the difference. So I'm a vocal champion of therapy because it helps you, and you yourself need it, whether you believe it or not. So my therapist gave me this visualization. So when I meditate, and so when you're meditating, you know how like thoughts start to crowd your mind? I just put them on a leaf and send them down the river, and it has helped. You have no idea how much that has helped, because it gives me distance from it, and it gives me permission to detach. Otherwise, I feel like I'm personally responsible for everything.
Yeah.
And being a solo practitioner, you really do feel like you're personally responsible for everything. So yeah, so that's how I would meditate. I recommend it to anybody. You can give me a call if you want to know more about it. But seriously, it's done wonders for me.
Wonderful. Thanks for sharing that. It's going to be very helpful.
You're welcome.
Okay, Sonia, I appreciate the time, and I hope to see you again very soon.
All right.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about this program, please visit www.immigrationlawyerspodcast.com. Also, attorneys can visit www.immigrationlawyerslistserv.com to learn more about special listservs for immigration lawyers that provide forums to discuss professional questions and issues and exchange information with other practitioners from across the globe.